and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage your moderator, Summer Flynn from the Dolls of Horror podcast.
Hello, everybody. I love it. Welcome. And now we have guest of honor, Mr. Doug Bradley. Get up here. Hey, I think you can do better than that. Let's go. Come on. That's more like it. That's what I want to hear. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Have you had a good convention so far?
Sucks. I'm miserable. No, it's fantastic. These guys are all wonderful.
Right?
It's nice to be doing this shit again.
Yeah.
You know?
It sure is.
I hope you're all enjoying again. I did a few last year. 2019, I did one in February, and then, you know.
Yeah. I love the conventions because you get to meet so many new and fun and interesting people, and you get to make new friends. And I need to give a special shout out to Gwen, who had the best pendant makeup yesterday. Young lady over there.
Oh, I remember when.
Right.
You were all painted up.
Right. Literally. And I'm like, I need a selfie. So conventions are great.
What's this thing?
That is my camera.
That's your camera.
We're taking a video. It's going to be posted on our website, thedollsofhorror.com.
You speak to my agent about that?
No, but I will.
Hi.
Yeah, The Dolls of Horror,
How are you?
for anybody who doesn't know, is the official podcast for the Days of the Dead convention.
Okay.
So yeah, we have a great time. If you ever miss the panel, God, I wish I was there, you can get it on our channel, for sure. So Doug, I want to go back to the very beginning. How did you get
Did I get
involved?
born? Well,
Sure, why not? How did you get involved in acting?
oh God. It was something that was always there. You know, Sunday school, school, nativity plays. Whenever there was a chance to do it, I wanted to do it. And I got taken to theatre as a kid. It's an English theatre tradition that doesn't really translate to America quite, I don't think, which is called pantomime. It's very much a Christmas thing. It's a bit like vaudeville, but it's always based on, you know, something like Robin Hood or Snow White or Sleeping Beauty or Mother Goose or something like that. And it always has musical numbers, entertainers, dance numbers built into the story. It's full of terrible jokes. That's one of the principal things about pantomime, which is one of the reasons why I love it, because I love terrible jokes. And it also has a tradition where there is always a character known as the Dame, who is usually a kind of big, blousy, middle-aged woman, always played by a man. And the leading lady is always, the principal boy, so there's always lovers in it as well. And the principal boy, playing the boy who falls in love with the girl, is always played by a girl. We fucked up in Britain. We're kind of crazy in the head. So we've been, with gender bendering, we've been doing it for centuries. It's a very old theatrical tradition. And I can remember going to those as a boy and being just entranced. No idea that you could do this as a living. I'm still not quite convinced of that. But it was just always in my head. The quantum leap was, this would take us forward to about 1969 at my high school in Liverpool, Quarry Bank High School. I talked my way into being in the school play. So I'm now what? I'm about, I guess, 14, 15. And luckily my class teacher form teacher, also directed the school plays. So he said, yeah, fine, sure, you're in. Be at rehearsals, whatever, tomorrow night. The Government Inspector by Nikolai Gogol. So I walk into rehearsals for the school play, and I meet my fellow cast members, one of whom is a fellow by the name of Clive Barker. And that was the day that changed my life. Clive was I think the head teacher at Quarry. I think he knew William Popjoy, his name was, no longer with us, a wonderful man. He knew that he had a talent that he couldn't contain and he couldn't quantify in Clive. And he kind of let that talent have its head. So Clive at school was writing, directing, starring in, and hand drawing his own posters for his own plays, which he was putting on at school. And Mr. Popjoy used to let him have the run of the mill of the school hall for a week. Everybody excused classes just to let Clive do his thing, which I think was pretty far-sighted of him, and in a lot of ways he kind of gave Clive that initial impetus. 10 years before I was a pupil at Quarry Bank, there was another pupil who was at Quarry Bank High School in Liverpool, who I think was of similar ilk to Clive, same head teacher, Mr. Popjoy. I think also realized that here was a difficult pupil with distinct talents and abilities that he couldn't make any sense of. So that pupil went to him and asked him for permission to form a skiffle band, which is kind of an English form of early rock and roll at the school, and Mr. Popjoy said yes. So that pupil went ahead and formed a skiffle band, which in honor of his school he called the Quarrymen, which may ring a few bells with one or two of you. That pupil, I'm led to believe, went on to have a bit of a career in the music industry. His name was John Lennon. So I've always figured that Bill Popjoy could, rest his head easy on the pillow at night, knowing that he had been directly instrumental in helping to launch the careers of both John and Clive. So that really did change my life. That was the point that, I came into that orbit with Clive and started doing stuff with him at school. Then after school and university, I was a university dropout. It was the early 1970s, it was the thing to do. I had hair down here. I was a hippie. I did 2 terms at university studying English literature. I realized I didn't want to be writing essays about Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. I wanted to be playing Mephistopheles, which in a kind of way, I think, if anyone's familiar with the play, I kind of ended up doing. So after school and university, we carried on doing theatre work. Just, kind of off our own bat. By degrees, we moved down to London, formed our own theatre company called The Dog Company, doing original plays by Clive, which are all published now, and many of which have been independently produced and performed over here. Stuff like The History of the Devil, in which I played the devil. So, we were, Clive's, even back at Quarry, his plays were called things like Inferno and Voodoo, one of which I went to see. I remember it featured ballet dancing Nazis in tutus. So he hasn't traveled too far down the street from where he started from. So that was my path, and the Dog Company ended in 1982, kind of by mutual consent. Clive had already been saying to me, have a read of these, and he was giving me handwritten manuscripts in kind of plastic shopping bags. See what you think. I'm trying to write a few short horror stories, see if I can make a bit of money out of them. those were first manuscripts of stories that ended up in the Books of Blood, and at some point included the Hellbound Heart in early manuscript form. And then I was at a party with him in 1985 in North London, and he said to me in the middle of a conversation about the price of fish, or something else entirely, oh, by the way, I'm trying to put together an independent, low-budget British horror movie, and I think there might be a part in there for you. And that was the first time Hellraiser came into my life.
And then history was made.
Apparently.
Well, that answers my question. I was going to ask, did he have any control over the casting? And,
No.
But he recommended you, obviously.
Apparently. Yes, that's my assumption.
If it's hard for you, means that's a recommendation.
Nobody seems to have argued with him. It was, it was my first movie. So it was a lot to get used to. I'd never been on a grown-up film set, So you're the first assistant director, and you're the second assistant director. You're the third assistant director? How many fucking assistant directors? I don't understand. Who do I talk to first, and who do I listen to? Are you important as the third assistant director, or you're more important than she is, but you must be more important than either of them. But then there's the first, but hang on, Clive's in charge, so all of that going on, all of the mysteries of how a movie set operates was all new to me. I'd never been to theatre school, nobody had taught me this shit. I was, learning it as I went along. So there was all of that to get used to, as well as 4 hours in the makeup chair and wearing contact lenses and having foam latex glued all over your face and wearing a skirt. Otherwise, it was plain sailing. I'm playing a character in this low-budget movie with no name, buried in latex, who's going to be on screen for less than 10 minutes. And I'm being paid union minimum rates to do it. If I'd been paid any less, I think, have been classed as an extra. So, what the fuck did I have to be excited about? Other than that, I was making more money than I had ever dreamt of making out of. Prior to that, I was working in repertory theatre in England, making slightly less than £100 a week. So, although I was not, I was not earning telephone numbers, everybody seems to think that. You get involved in movies and you're immediately a rich person. Hell no. If Clive said, I think he made about £18,000 all told out of Hellraiser. I think I made about 8. I was being paid by the day with, extra for extra days and overtime and so forth. 8 grand. But as I say, I was thrilled to bits. I was able to put down a deposit to start buying my own flat in London. So, yeah, it's good. But as I say, people seem to think I was strolling into Hellraiser, as star of the show and saying, here comes the rest of my life. I really did not. I knew because Clive was at the helm, because I read the script and I knew it was very good, I knew we were doing something interesting, something different. I thought we'd make a bit of a splash, and I thought we might be a bit of a noise for a few weeks, and then we'd get forgotten about and never go away. If you'd suggested to me, when I was sitting in what we laughingly called the makeup room at Cricklewood Production Village at 6 o'clock on a damp Tuesday morning, and said to me, I think, I have to pause to do the maths these days, 1986 we shot the movie, 36 years from now, you'll be sitting in a ballroom in a hotel in Atlanta, Georgia, answering questions about all this. I would not have known what you were talking about. It wouldn't have made any sense to me. No sense. It's been amazing and extraordinary, and I am more grateful than you guys will ever know. And I'm addressing you as representatives of the entirety of the wonderful army of horror fandom. More grateful than you'll ever know for the support that I've had over the years. It's extraordinary, it's amazing. I don't understand it, but God love you for it.
Well, you know, I think I've been watching horror since I was 8 years old. Okay? So it was all horror all the time. After
I'm
that,
getting used to this notion.
but if you had told me in 1992, when I was full-blown into my horror obsession at 10 years old, that I would ever get to meet my heroes,
I'll be sitting on the sofa interviewing them.
right, or even talking to them, meeting them in a ballroom at a table, I would have said, you're nuts!
Why would I be doing that? Yes, right.
Like, right, why would he meet me? Right, I know I'm not the only one that feels this way, but yes. And I love Pinhead. I think we all do. I love a lot of the horror villains of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but Pinhead is really special because he likes to have a chat. he wants to talk for a moment before he tears your soul apart and figure out what you're all about. And I think that's genius. So.
Well, I think you've answered your own question.
It wasn't a
no,
question.
I agree, and I've said that, you know. It's a curious process because he's not just a boogeyman waiting around the corner
With a knife.
in the shadows waiting to jump you and you know, slit your throat or whatever. It's all down to you, really. You have to become aware of the existence of a thing called a lament configuration, because none of this works without that. Why would you even become aware that that thing exists? Having become aware that it exists, you need to be interested in it enough to want to chase it down, which isn't easy. Find someone who's selling it, go through the bartering process, part with whatever you think it's worth to you. Then you have to work out how to open the damn thing. Then,
With the right intention.
exactly what I was going to say. Pinhead says in Hellbound, when Tiffany opens the box and he stops the Cenobites, and he says it is not hands that call us, it is desire. So you've got to work out how to open the thing and do it with the right motivation. Then and only then will you get to meet the guy.
Right.
And then, as you said,
And his friends.
he wants to soften and pass the time of day.
Yeah.
And I'm puzzled about that. I mean, it's very easy to take that for granted in the screenplay that that's what happens. I wondered why. And I knew that he had been human. We had not talked about the backstory that we start to develop in Hellbound with Captain Elliot Spencer.
That's my favorite one, by the way.
Explored further in the third movie. I knew he had been human. I didn't know who and I didn't know when. Whether it was last week or last month or last year, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, I had no idea. But I had that idea in my head that he was kind of in mourning for a humanity that he couldn't quite remember. That he could remember the fact of being human, but not the details. And that helped me make sense of why he appears to be so extremely interested in people. But not just in the way that we might say, I love meeting people, because you know we like to meet new people and hear their stories and what they do and what they're interested in and so forth. That's not what Pinhead's about, not really. He doesn't want to just pass the time of day. He wants to know the dirty little secrets that are hanging around in the forgotten corners of your head. Because those are the interesting bits. And he wants to tease those out of you, and then he'll tear your soul apart. But I, you know, he is a conundrum.
Yeah.
And I think it's certainly part of the power of the Cenobites in the first movie, that they tell you an awful lot about themselves without telling you anything. We're Cenobites. Okay? we're explorers in the further regions of experience. What the fuck does that mean? we're angels to some, demons to others, okay, all right. Yeah, but what are you? And I think you kind of come out of the first movie still wondering, what are they exactly? Where do they, are they? There's a lot of talk about hell in Hellraiser, but it's never defined in terms of Christian theology. I think deliberately on Clive's part. There's never any talk about the devil or Satan or Lucifer or, all of that. So you come away from the first movie really none the wiser, and I think that's part of the power. Because the things we don't completely understand are always the things that are scariest. Once we fully understand them, then they're no longer really very scary to us. Which is part of the problem of sequels and franchises, that inevitably you have to start explaining. As soon as you do that, you diminish power. It's inevitable. Can't be avoided. But there are questions about Pinhead that I've never really answered, and I'm okay with that. I'm quite happy to know that I don't really entirely understand what the character is or what he's about. I don't. People say, especially on the later movies, well, hey Doug, you know everything about Pinhead, so what's that? And I say, I've no idea. Don't know. I have an emotional thing up here somewhere, kind of just in this corner of the back of my head,
Okay.
which I almost understand, but I can't explain it to you. I don't know.
Yeah. So.
It's right there if you can see it.
Right here.
Yeah.
Right here, guys. Right here.
Does that make any sense?
Right there.
I may have shaved it off this morning.
I have one more question, and then I'll turn it over for some audience questions. And we have a segment on our show. We'll break down a movie, obviously, but one of our segments is Epic Line. And since Pinhead likes to chat and talk, what is your epic line? Like your favorite line that you said as Pinhead?
Wow.
From any movie, anyone at all.
I don't. From any movie?
Any of them, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the rest.
Okay. There's an awful lot of them. I mean, I really got lucky. It was one thing I realized when I read the screenplay that, I was very, very familiar with Clive's writing over the years, obviously, and people here who are familiar with Clive's writing in the Books of Blood and the novels and so forth will know that he naturally has quite a high poetic style in his writing. It's one of his trademarks about his writing. Coming to the Hellraiser screenplay, I was struck that he was kind of writing down, if I can put it that way, writing in movie-ese, standard screenplay language. And then Pinhead came along, and to me it felt like Clive had taken the handbrake off, and he was, okay, right, now I can let go with this fella. So not only did I have all these wonderful lines, but they were in kind of capital letters, neon lit by comparison with how everybody else in the movie was talking. And I've always said, with that makeup on and that costume on, with those lines in my mouth, it was falling off a log acting for me, really. I had nothing left to do. The lines were amazing. The one, it's not that it's necessarily my favorite line, because I love all of them, a huge number of them. In Bloodline, I was just talking today, and this was not Clive, this was Pete Atkins. It was part of the third part of the Scouse Mafia, the Liverpool Mafia in the Hellraiser films, wrote the screenplays for Hellbound, Hell on Earth, and Bloodline, and had been part of the theatre company back in Liverpool. That's why I say he's the third member of the Liverpool Mafia. With the security twins in Bloodline, Pain has a human face. Allow me to show it to you, gentlemen. I am Pain. Is always a favourite. The audience of death, I called it in Hellraiser 3. Oh, it's unbearable, isn't it? The agony, the suffering of strangers, the agony of friends. there's a secret song at the center of the world, Joey, and its sound is like razors through flesh. I am here to pump up the volume, to press the face of humanity into its own stinking heart. Beautiful. Lovely. Wow.
You know,
Thank you, Pete. Great. But the one in the first screenplay, the one that I remember underlining, highlighting, and I wrote next to it, gag. Because I was
like a joke or like a gag?
no, not like vomiting. But I was making a note to myself that this is a joke. But it's a dark joke. It's a joke with an undertow of threat. So if I'm doing my job right, people should laugh, but a little uneasily.
Yeah.
And that line was, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Beautiful. You know, part 3 is my favorite of the series. I don't really know why. I think maybe it's because I was a semi-appropriate age to see it when it was new, where I was catching up with the other 2 before that, and I love the cast, of course. But my favorite line is from that one, and it is something along the lines of, if you have a quality...
To JP,
Yes.
in the when I'm still in the Pillar of Soul.
Right.
If you have a quality, let it define you.
Whatever it is.
Yes.
And also I loved Not Quite.
Jesus.
Yes, that was his line. Your
Not
comeback was brilliant.
I did also love spitting the bullets out after he shot me. That was
That was good. That was good. You know, even though you were stuck in the Pillar of Souls.
It was great fun, but it wasn't easy.
Right.
Either, all that stuff, because you know those things when you go to when you go to the ocean and on the boardwalk they have the things where you know for the kids to stick their heads through to become other people.
Right.
And well, that's what I was doing
Yeah.
for all those scenes. So it was like a box, and they'd done a special version of the makeup that was glued to here and not glued any further. Then all of this was loose. So I get into the box and I have 2 things here to hold onto with my hands, put my head through, and then stand there like that while they then attached the makeup to the pillar. So it looks as though I'm part of the pillar. And then I stood there. And I stood there. And I'd do my little bit of acting. And Tony Hickox, the director, would say, "Cut." And everyone else is, so, anyway, so I'm, you know, and I'm you know, and action, and acting, and cut. And that was it. You know, and then eventually I get to back out of it.
Yeah.
Straighten my back up. So it was a weird process to me, all of that. Just not being able to move until the scenes were shot, but it's good fun.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love it. I love it. Anyway. All right, audience questions. Let me see those hands. I see a guy right back there. In the back, yes. Is Pinhead a metaphor for desire?
For desire.
Right?
Yeah.
I think Pinhead says, is it in Bloodline? I am so exquisitely empty. I think he's a metaphor for anything you want him to be. And he will be a metaphor. You pick desire. I think Pinhead would ask you, why? Why desire? Why is desire important to you? Why is that the first thing you pick up? Why should he not be a metaphor for pain? Or a metaphor for sadism or masochism? Or, you know, whatever. And why do you go there? Is that sexual desire? Or what is the desire that is important to you? I think he would turn the question back on you. I don't know the answer to that myself, personally. And as I say, I think, again, that belongs to the grey areas that I don't need to answer. Because of that. But that's what he will, angel to some, demons to others. Whatever you want him to be, he will be that for you. The outcome will be the same.
All right, anyone else? Yes.
In the Hellbound Heart as well, sorry, but in the Hellbound Heart, I think it's also an important element that when Frank opens the box, he's assuming that a specific thing is going to happen. That they're going to open that portal to that paradise, that place of permanent pleasure. And Frank assumes it's going to be a place of permanent sexual pleasure. Clive says he expected more, because initially nothing happens. He expected more. At least he expected women, naked bodies strewn at his feet. So that's what was in his head. What happens in the Hellbound Heart is everything. Everything happens at once. A bit like dying people maybe, are supposed to see experience their entire life in a split second. What Frank experiences in that moment is everything. Clive describes it as hearing whispers of conversation. If you can imagine just this bit, think of every song you've ever heard. Every song you've ever heard. From nursery rhymes to rock and roll. Everything. Being played simultaneously in your head. And also your sensory experience has gone crazy. Clive says, he can feel every dust mote on his skin. Every drawn breath is chafing his lungs. Everything. He's everything. He's crying, he's screaming, he's laughing. Everything's happening at the same time. And it's overwhelming, and he starts to think he's going insane. And he's screaming for it to stop. He hasn't got the paradise he wanted. He's got everything, all at the same time. And then it stops. And the female Cenobite is watching him and says, "Have you finished dreaming? Good. Time to play." And then the serious stuff starts.
I really love in the story the description of Pinhead, bejeweled spikes, and that they even said, I don't know if anyone has read the short story, they said he even has someone in his tongue.
Yes, yeah.
It's brilliant.
He's described exactly as you see him, but pins, which are jeweled on the end,
Right.
with a row of bells sewn into the flesh around the back of his neck, and his tongue was similarly decorated, and his voice was light and breathy, like that of an excited girl. Now, similarly decorated tongue might have been a problem. Bring
Not practical. Exactly, not practical at all, but a beautiful book.
But did he say something about tearing your bowl apart? I'm not sure. And quite catchy. He doesn't speak well, does he? And I think
speech impediment.
I think the row of bells around the neck might have been slightly comical. Because,
Fantasy.
my cat wears a collar with a bell on it. And everywhere she goes tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. And I think the idea that Pinhead would have gone gently tinkling
along.
might have undercut the sense of terror and dread. I don't know.
It makes me think of Krampus with his bells.
There you go.
Right.
Yes. And I like breathy voice like that for an excited girl. I don't know. I'll tell you something. I will. Tell your Central Park. Sorry, girls. I'm sure you sound more interesting than that when you're excited. But you know, I went with the voice I heard in my head, which wasn't that.
All right, so one right over here, sir. Yes.
All right, well, fun fact, my lady friend here, her friend actually was in Hellraiser 3. She was the child that was killed at the start.
You were what?
Not me,
Her friend, her
Oh.
best friend was in Hellraiser 3. She was the girl that was killed at the beginning.
The nurse?
She was a club goer, I believe.
Oh.
The one in the bed?
The nanny.
The one right before Jesus Christ, not quite.
Oh,
The girl.
Sucked into
Yes.
into the pillar. I remember her. Yeah.
The girl with the great rap. I'm just saying.
Very skinny girl, because everybody who wore a body skin suit, they have to be very thin because you have to then be able to put a
Whole entire
Vogue-Tex
layer.
bodysuit on top of them and not make them look weird. Yeah, like Oliver Smith, who played Skin Frank in Hellraiser. Very skinny guy. Very skinny guy. He's also the guy who's slashing in his arms in Hellbound, by the way.
My question to you was...
That's good. Are you still in contact with him?
Yes, my best friend.
Really?
Yes.
That's
Her
crazy.
name's Amy German.
Okay. Wow. Well, I don't remember her name, forgive me, but please say hello to her.
I shall.
That's mad.
But I think you have
That's
So
great.
my initial question was,
Yep.
I know that the Hellraiser franchise went down kind of a direct-to-video rabbit hole. So, but when Revelations came out, why did you decide to distance yourself? Was that a conscious decision on your end, or did they not invite you back, or what was happening there?
It's a lighthearted question.
The movie was being made for political reasons.
Right.
Somebody in the legal office at Dimension had realized that under the terms of their master contract, if they didn't make another sequel within a given space of time, they were losing the rights to the franchise. And somebody had suddenly gone, "Woo!" That's in September. Let me check the calendar. It's what? It's July. We have to have a movie rolling by September the 3rd. There was no other reason. They had no other motivation for making the movie. I was contacted about it. It was being made for nothing.
Right.
There was a quote that I heard had come down from on high. We don't give a shit what you do, just get this movie in front of the cameras. Which is, kind of warm and fuzzy. But there was no money involved. Now look, I've always been very honest about this. I did ask to see the script. At the point at which I'm being contacted, it is the middle of July. There's no script, no cast, no crew, nothing. This is not realistic, really. It's not, I did ask to see the script, and I thought the script was, to be honest, well, it wasn't ready. The scripts go through passes and rewrites, and for a reason. So I said no, and I was being offered not very much money at all to do it. Now, fans say to me, "Thank you for your integrity." And I say to them, "Well, let's, in a pinheadish kind of way, let's discuss integrity." Because if everything else had been as I've just described it for making Revelation, and they'd been offering me $1 million to do it, do you think I'd have done it? You're damn right. So, every man has his price, let's put it that way. They didn't name it. So that was why Revelation didn't happen. I couldn't imagine it was going to be any good. I couldn't imagine it was going to be a valid contribution to the Hellraiser series. And I think I was right. But so it was my decision to walk away.
And more. I know I have more. You have the front right there.
originally you're just referred to as Lee Cenobite or Hell Priest. When did you first hear Pinhead, and what were your thoughts when that
Before
kind of
we-
gave breath?
Before we started making the movie, the names were given to us by Bob Keene's Image Animation Special Effects makeup crew, who were making the makeups for the Cenobites for the movie. They needed to call us something other than, lead Cenobite number 1 or whatever, So they gave us all affectionate nicknames. Pinhead, Butterball, Chatterer, and they named the female Cenobite Deep Throat. Which I think is probably why the female Cenobite continued to be credited as female Cenobite. But so even like when I was going to my first step was to go and have my life cast done. Even at that stage, they were talking about Pinhead. In reality, he doesn't have a name. But on set, everybody was calling us Pinhead, Butterball, Chatterer. And the names just stuck. I'm not sure whether on, you probably know better than I do, whether on Hellbound we're already credited as Pinhead, Butterball, and Chatterer. Certainly by Hellraiser 3, I was being credited as that. And everybody in the media, all the fans, everywhere, everybody was talking about Pinhead. I've always said that on set, it's lucky for people that I don't have a Daniel Day-Lewis approach to these things, a method acting approach to these things. I remember particularly when I first worked over here, that was Hellraiser 3, which was the first movie to be shot in the States. I hear the first AD say, can we have Pinhead to set, please? And I actually said to him, you can call me Doug, And he said, oh, okay, that's fine. A lot of actors don't like to be called by their actual name when they're working. They want to be called by their character name. And I said, oh yeah, I'm aware of that. I think that's bullshit. Until you call action, I'm done. Okay, so that's fine. But I don't want to tell tales out of school. And Jesus Christ, the guy's won 59 Oscars or whatever, 5 I think, isn't it? So fuck do I know, but about acting. But that on Lincoln, he would only answer to Mr. President on set.
Oh, wow.
Lucky I wasn't in the cast. So I always said if I took that approach, we'd be in trouble.
You'd be hooking the hell out of people.
Well, the first AD would have said, can we have Doug to set, please? Silence. Because I'm not
Who's
Doug.
that?
I'm in character. Oh, can we have Pinhead to set, please?
Jimmy Crickets.
Can we have the lead Cenobite to set, please? Fucking guy with the pins in his head, can you get on to that now? We've got a movie to make, because I'm playing a character who doesn't have a name,
Right.
doesn't acknowledge having a name. We're in trouble, so Doug will do.
I saw some over here.
The Hell Priest it's weird how, as far as I'm aware, the first time that's used is in the Scarlet Gospels, and it's stuck. Instantly it's stuck.
What were your thoughts on it, though?
Clive came up with some bizarre kind of Aztec name for it. Jibi Hotep or something. I didn't think that was one of Clive's better days, to be honest. I saw that and I thought, no. No, but yeah. But the Hell Priest isn't really a name, it's just a
Title.
status. Yeah.
Yes. So we have time for 1 or 2 more.
This guy here has had his hand up
All
for a
right.
long time. Yeah.
Thank you for everything, Doug.
Everything? Wow.
Over the years, like Elliot Spencer, like at the end of part 2, Shadard changes everybody back to their human form. So you start and you see him nod, kind of like he has this human reflection for a moment. Then in part 3, you start to see that the dichotomy of the human and Cenobite start to really split.
Yeah.
What do you think that trigger was, and what? Because even though Elliot's not like Frank, looking for desire and really ego-involved things, he more seemed like an explorer that wanted to break the levels of human existence and know what was out there on Spencer's end. So what triggered, I guess, a more human response and for him to really want to separate from Pinhead, or the Hell Priest, or whatever we would like to call him?
Wow.
And after they do separate, do you think the Pinhead we see Afterlife in Bloodlines later on is just the demon form, just the Cenobite? Like he has no humanity left in him all. Is that how you see that split? And what do you think the actual transition was there? Sorry for the level question.
It's a very, very good question. How long do we have?
Yeah, about 5 minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes.
It really is a very good question, and you are absolutely right. At the end of Hellbound, and it goes back to what I was saying before about me being aware that Pinhead had been human, that he could remember a humanity that he couldn't remember the precise details of. When Kirsty shows us the photograph in Hellbound, now it's very, very shorthand. I'll accept that. But I think part of the problem with Hellbound is that towards the end of the movie, there are so many damn storylines trying to get resolved. There's not really any one focus at the end of the film, which I think should have been the focus on the battle between Shamar and Pinhead, but then I probably would say that, wouldn't I? But, so Pinhead shows him the photograph of Elliot Spencer and he says, "I remember." And we just have to accept that in that moment, he remembers everything about the human being that he was, and he remembers everything about what it means to be human, which is what leads him to sacrifice himself to save Tiffany and Kirsty. And you're quite right, that leads to the fact that Pinhead is not returned to the box, that he's now in the Pillar of Souls. So he's no longer rule-bound, as he was in the first 2 films. So he's out there able to operate as a free agent. Elliot is an interesting story, I think, because we meet him at the beginning of Hellbound, not in the First World War. Again, it's very brief, and that's to do with losing budget on Hellbound, which is another story that we probably don't have time for now. There would have been 2 establishing scenes. One of Elliot making his way down an Indian street or a bazaar, making it clear that we're in India, and he's looking for the place that is selling the lament configuration, which he finds, he goes in, and then that would have been the second scene, the interior of the stall in the bazaar somewhere in India. So he's still in the English army. He would have been fighting to put down the Indian mutinies in the early 1920s when Britain still had an empire and India was part of it. And he would have gone through that classic bargaining scene that we're very familiar with from the Hellraiser movies. What's your pleasure, sir? And so how much is it? What's it worth to you? All of that. And he leaves with the lament configuration. We lost those 2 scenes because of losing budget, which was because of the financial crash and transfer of budget from LA to London. 1/3 of the budget was wiped off because of movements in exchange rates. So those 2 scenes required 2 quite complicated sets to be built for what were basically 2 establishing shots. So they went, and we just come on. And your only clue that we're in India is that he's in tropical uniform, the pale coloured uniform, not the olive green of the English army. And there's Indian music vaguely playing on the radio, and there's a fly swat on the bed. That's your only clue that we're in India. So he has, we find out in Hellraiser 3, he fought in the First World War as a captain. I did research on this coming to Hellraiser 3. You didn't want to be a captain in the British Army in the First World War. Your life expectancy was not good. I don't know how much you know about the Battle of the Somme, but it was supposed to be the breakthrough battle. 1915. It was going to break through the enemy lines and drive the German trenches wide open. So you've got both armies, the Allied on the Western Front, the Allied armies and the Germans are in their trenches with no man's land between them. And they've been there, not really moving, with occasional battles now for 2 years. So the Somme was going to break that wide open. You have aerial bombardment that goes over the heads of British trenches onto the German trenches. It goes on for days. And so the British soldiers were being told that the German gunneries had been wiped out. And all they had to do when they were given the signal was to come up out of the trenches and walk in battle formation across no man's land to occupy untenanted trenches, because the Germans would have been blown to kingdom come. Two things. A lot of the artillery missed, of course, and the Germans had extremely efficient trenches, which meant they could kind of go underground and get out of the way of all that stuff. The other thing is, normally you cease the aerial bombardment, which is like a curtain, before dawn, so that the advancing soldiers are coming across no man's land, still with the aerial bombardment going, under cover of darkness. The artillery fire stopped and nothing happened. The call for the soldiers to go over the top was delayed. It was broad daylight by the time they did. In front of the trenches, lines of barbed wire with gaps in them. So everybody had to come through in single file through those gaps. And then they're told to line up in battle formation and march across no man's land. The German gunners, who had not been wiped out, can find the gap in the barbed wire and line up on it and wait for one soldier to come through. Boom, next soldier, boom, next soldier, boom, next soldier, boom. Those who don't get shot at that point line up in battle formation. German machine gunners, thank you. And that was what happened. Day one of the Battle of the Somme, the darkest day in the history of the British Army, 63,000 killed and injured in the first 24 hours of a battle that would go on for months and claim 2 million lives. 2 million lives. And gained the Allies about half a mile of territory.
So all the horrors you just spoke of there, that would only add to Elliot Spencer being just so exposed to almost every degree of humanity, war, and everything, where he would search out for something like the box to find something that would make him feel again.
Absolutely right. And there were two things. One, I was then watching a documentary about the Somme, which included interviews with survivors. Remember that the British Army was made up of very, very localized battalions. Very localized, geographically localized. So there would have been an Atlanta regiment. And if you move out of Atlanta to smaller cities and towns, and even villages in Atlanta, they would have had their own battalion. Everybody knew each other. There were brothers in the same battalion. Roll call the next day, was calling name, silence, name, silence, name, present, name, silence, name, silence, name, silence, name, present. And you knew the people who were either dead or were still lying in no man's land, dying. You knew them personally. Maybe you went to school with them. Maybe it was your best friend. Maybe it was your cousin. You knew them. You lived down the street from them. And one of the survivors said, I shouldn't be here. He was like 90 when he was being interviewed. I shouldn't be here. I felt like a fraud the whole of my life. I felt like a cheat. I have no reason to be alive. I didn't do anything to justify being alive when so many of my friends were dead. And I should be with them dead under the soil of Flanders Field. And I said, thank you, sir, because you just told me that's Elliot. I wish I was dead. I should be dead. I shouldn't be here. And I imagined, and I honestly would like to have explored this a little bit more, I would have imagined Elliot driving himself into his own personal hell in the intervening years.
He is in his own hell just as you are.
Whatever that version in those 4 or 5 years, from the aftermath of the Battle of the Somme, the aftermath of the First World War, and remember, you come home to a Great Britain in which and this is why Pete made the equation between Vietnam as America's hell on earth and the First World War as Britain's hell on earth. He comes home to a Britain which has lost an entire generation, either killed or wounded, or so permanently mentally damaged that they might as well be dead. And it was very severe, and nobody understood post-traumatic stress disorder then. Soldiers were found wandering behind Allied lines, wandering around, no idea who they were or where they were. They were shot for desertion, not given psychological help and treatment. They were shot for desertion. So I imagined himself pushing himself into his own hell of sex and drugs and drink and
I didn't even feel like you would do that.
whatever the 1920 version of rock and roll was. Jazz, I guess. You know, it was the jazz age, and there's a reason for that. People lived like crazed idiots in the 1920s for a good reason, because they'd just been through hell. And that's what I imagined, and that was what had driven Elliot when he caught wind of this lament configuration. This was going to be his passport out of this ship. Not quite.
And with that,
Can you say one line for me? Do
Go
I
ahead.
care what God? Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks?
Now, if I could go back, I would do that so differently.
Really?
It's one of the few times, it's by no means the only time, but it's one of the few times. I don't watch these movies a lot, but that one in particular, when I saw the film, I thought, why the fuck did you play it like that? I got angry. So in the movie, I played it as, do I look like someone what's the line? Do I look
like someone who cares what
what
God
God
thinks?
thinks? And I got angry. Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? And I heard me do that, and I said to myself, dead wrong. Completely dead wrong. I should have let it go. Moment, pause.
Maybe that's
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? It should have been played all the way down there. So if I could go back and do it again, I'd change that mind.
so on that, Mr. Radley, thank you very much
You're very welcome.
for coming out. Thank you. I know we didn't get to everyone, but please go see him at his table and you can ask your questions then.